Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Nebraska Tech Collaborative's NSWERS webinar. I'm Jona Van Deun, and we're really excited that you can be here with us today. The Nebraska Tech Collaborative, just real quick, we're just going to give you a quick update about who we are and why we've chosen to do this NSWERS webinar today. So the Nebraska Tech Collaborative is a statewide Aksarben workforce initiative. And we're so proud and honored to be part of this 125-year-old organization committed to workforce development, building communities through community grants, honoring the heritage of agriculture, and supporting our youth through scholarships. We at the NTC rally around kind of four main points. We rally around the creation of 10,000 tech jobs across the state, highly skilled, highly paid. We want to make sure that this new 10,000 workforce is represented by 40% women and 20 from underrepresented groups. And we want to create 300 new tech startups so we can create 300 new businesses or attract new companies here to Nebraska to create a second and third footprint. And finally, we need to evangelize across the state and across this country about what makes us so wonderful in Nebraska and why this tech ecosystem would work for entrepreneurs and talent looking to make their place in Nebraska. So the only way that I'm able to punch above my weight at the NTC is that we are governed by, or we work through a committee structure. And one of our committees is the Higher Education Committee, which is chaired by Mike Lechtenberger and staffed by Shauna Dorsey, both from Mutual of Omaha. And as the Higher Education Committee starts looking at interventions and how to look at how higher education and the business community can collaborate more so we can get more highly skilled tech talent, keep more students here in the state. The NSWERS program was of interest to us because this is going to revolutionize how we look at workforce. So NSWERS will allow stakeholders to view Nebraska-based student progression from preschool to career and will include information about applicable interventions during these respective training programs. This session may be particularly helpful to business because this will allow us to work together and bridge the gap for tech. And we should all be excited about this because this is going to allow us to look at, across the students' academic career and into their regular career and how we might be able to make better connections to get more people included into tech. So we're really excited that Dr. Susan Fritz and Dr. Kristin Yates have agreed to do this. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will turn it over to Dr. Susan Fritz.
Thank you for having us here today. We are absolutely thrilled to share what we have been doing around a project that we call NSWERS. Yes, I'm Dr. Susan Fritz. I have the privilege of serving the University of Nebraska as Executive Vice President and Provost. I am a native Nebraskan. I've been at the University of Nebraska for 30 years, and I'm a tenured faculty member at UNL. And today I'm joined by Dr. Kristin Yates, who I will introduce in just a moment. I am looking forward to talking with you a bit about what a data system is, giving you a brief overview of what we've done. And then of course, Kristin has got a great example that she's going to show you on a pilot that was conducted last year. So Kristin, if we could go to the slides. So it's probably a good place to start, and that is by asking, what is a statewide longitudinal data system? So we have a definition that we're going to be working from. And at its essence, it is a data system. So I like to think of it as a big drawer that data is put into. And we have the opportunity with data in that drawer to make some interesting connections. And so if we think about formal connections that are necessary to make this happen. So think about agreements that are behind this. And so as we look at what makes a statewide data system, a longitudinal data system, we know that we need to have data from at least 2 or more core agencies. And if so, if we go to slide 2, we'll see in that last major bullet, 2 or more of the following core agencies. So early learning, so think 0 to pre-kindergarten, and then K-12, then of course post-secondary or college, and then workforce. So any relationship or formal connections between 2 or more core agencies. And so the next question, logical question, is how prevalent is this? So if we look at slide 3, we see an array of the prevalence of these arrangements. And 13 states have no systems in place. We aspire to be in that top group, that group that's designated by, at least on my screen, the blue square at the top. And that is to have connected all of these entities from pre-K through K-12, post-secondary, and workforce. And so we are likely to be about the 20th state in the country to have a system like this. So then the next question that we can ask ourselves is, what would it mean? What could it mean for Nebraska? Well, I'm really excited about what I think it could mean for Nebraska, and I hope you are too. And that is that this statewide longitudinal data system could help us have a culture of data-informed decision-making like we have never enjoyed. We will be able to rely on facts rather than hunches or educational guesses as we look at improvements across the education span of our young people. We'll also be able to integrate data, to look at data that crosses the K-12 transom over into higher ed, and higher ed into the Department of Labor, for example. We will be able to provide it in a secure environment. We also are going to be able to guarantee that we follow FERPA, which is the federal regulations on how one deals with sensitive data, particularly in education. And then also, because we are able to aggregate a great deal of information, we will be able to have some data transparency in that we can create dashboards. Some of them will be publicly facing, some of them will be inwardly facing to the partners. But that kind of transparency will help all of us have a greater understanding based on facts, what is happening for young people and what happens for them as they enter into the workforce. So it also gives us a capacity for some in-depth research and analysis so that we can look for trends across the P16 experiences of students. And then certainly insight into the life cycle continuum of our students and workers. We think that, for instance, if we could understand the commonalities that may predict why or how students pick majors and careers, we might be able to strengthen the likelihood that they will pursue different careers. And so take, for example, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's College of Engineering, the only college of engineering in the state. Their goal is to have 5,000 students studying engineering. So a logical question is, what are the P12 paths of students who enter into engineering? And then probably as important is what happens then to them as undergraduates? What's a differentiator between students who complete an engineering degree and students who don't? And then we can also take a look at how successful they are when they get out into the workforce, and do they end up in positions that are related to engineering? And so there are all sorts of answers that we can pursue, but it starts with this bedrock of having good, consistent data that we can rely on. I would also say that we are looking for ways that we can more effectively and efficiently prepare tomorrow's workforce in general. For those in public education, this could mean more efficient use of taxpayer dollars to yield an educated workforce, better outcomes for young people, better outcomes for our state. Next slide, please. So several years ago at the outset, the partners, through some grant dollars through the Peter Kiewit Foundation, participated in an exercise with stakeholders, logical stakeholders of a data system like this. And here's what they told us the key uses would be. They'd like to see us use it to track workforce outcomes. They saw an opportunity for us to provide feedback that might drive program improvement and maybe even educator or teacher improvement. They thought that it would be very important for us to have a relationship where we provide information to policymakers so that they're informed as they put forth state policy and resource allocation. Another one that is dear to my heart is closing the P16 achievement gap. I don't think that many of us want to rest until there is no difference in achievement based on race, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, but we need to first understand where those achievement gaps start and how we can end them. And then certainly providing students, post-secondary and workforce data to third-party researchers who can help us think about ways that we might partner to address workforce needs, looking at things like stackable credentials and long-term sustainability of employment pathways. So they found many good uses for it. So we persisted. Next slide. And out of all of that good work was an entity that was developed called the Nebraska Statewide Workforce and Educational Reporting System. We call it NSWERS. Next slide. So here's a brief history of the key events that got us where we are today. So back in 2010, so imagine we've been at this for a decade. The university, the Department of Education, the state colleges, and the community colleges were required by statute to adopt an MOU which said that we would share data. And so we said, yes, we would do that. And another MOU was developed to share student enrollment information, degree, and other data. And our friends at the Department of Education developed a high school feedback report that was developed in response to the ARA requirement, American Reinvestment and Recovery Act requirement. So fast forward 9 years and we signed an interlocal agreement with the Department of Education, the university, state colleges, and community colleges where we agreed to work together. Next slide. And we agreed to work in a structure that's represented on this slide. So you'll see on the left the partners that I just mentioned. You'll also see that we have an affiliate partner in the Department of Labor. We have an executive council that we've established. We've got a management committee that's in place. We're working on hiring staff. Something I want to point out to those of you that are with us today is we will be standing up an advisory committee, and we will welcome the opportunity to have individuals from the community, from business and industry represented on that advisory committee. So if that's of interest, please be watching, because we'll work with Jona and others to get the word out when we're recruiting advisory committee members. Next slide. So we have an executive council of which I serve as president. Dr. Paul Turman with the Nebraska State College System is the vice president. Dr. Matt Bloomstead, secretary treasurer from the Department of Education, where he serves as commissioner. And then member at large, Dr. Paul Illich, who is the president of Southeast Community College. Now we've had 3 executive council meetings so far. We are currently advising for a director of NSWERS with the hope that the director will be hiring the remaining staff. We hope to have a decision on the directorship by August 1st. Now, something that I would like to mention, well, let's go forward with the next slide, please. I'll also say we have a place to put these folks. The University of Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska Hall, we have secured office space that's being renovated for this team. We've also raised more than $6 million in private grant funding to support the first 4 years of NSWERS operation. And I'd like to take the opportunity to give a shout out to those funders who might be with us, or perhaps you know someone that's associated with one of these foundations. Please thank them for us. They've really stepped up. The Susan Thompson Buffett Foundation, the Peter Kiewit Foundation, the Whites Family Foundation, the Suzanne and Walter Scott Foundation, the William and Ruth Scott Family Foundation, and Sherwood Foundation. They've all been instrumental in assisting us with this 4 years of funding. We're also excited that this fall, the Nebraska legislature, their Business and Labor Committee put forth Bill 1160 supporting NSWERS and made it a priority bill of that committee. So we're very hopeful, and there's lots of interest and excitement actually across the body about this effort. Now, I've told you about how we got here. What I want to do now is turn over the podium to my colleague, Dr. Kristin Yates, who's going to show you a pilot that we conducted just to see if we could match data. And I think you're going to be very interested in what you see. Thank you.
I am Dr. Kristin Yates. I am the Associate Vice President for Enterprise Data Solutions and the Chief Data Officer at the University of Nebraska. That's kind of a mouthful. When I tell my mother what I actually do for a living, I tell her I'm lucky to get paid to be a big data nerd. We did a small study just to look a little bit at some of the sorts of information that we hope to be able to produce through NSWERS. We haven't had a lot of information about what happens to our graduates once they leave us and hopefully enter the workforce. So we did a small a proof of concept study with the Department of Labor, and we can't thank them enough for being really helpful to us in working on that proof of concept. We started out, as you tend to do with these things, sort of looking at the big picture of what's happening with regard to income and education level. We looked at just the United States and Nebraska at first. You can see that there is a difference in income level. More education generally is more income. We can also see that at the bachelor's degree level, Nebraska, in terms of median income, is perhaps a little bit behind the national average. We look at trend data over time. We see that the median income for individuals with all levels of education is generally tending to go up, and that we see this same pattern over time where there is a degree premium essentially for getting a bachelor's degree over just having some college or high school. We're fortunate in Nebraska that our trends are actually somewhat better than what we're seeing nationally. If you look at the top green line, you can see that the median annual earnings for bachelor's degree holders in the United States are actually declining a little bit over time if you inflation adjust them. So all these slides I've shown you that are trend slides are inflation adjusted, so you can compare both ends of the spectrum and draw a similar conclusion. So we said to ourselves, great, so we know this stuff about what's happening in Nebraska and what's happening in the United States. I wonder what's happening with University of Nebraska graduates, and further, what happens to students who start their education with us and don't graduate. There has been a lot of talk nationally about, what is the cost of both the institution and the student when students aren't retained and they don't graduate. And I think we can demonstrate that there is in fact a cost. Just as a quick takeaway, we looked at 3 cohorts of full-time, first-time freshmen, which is about 18,500 students. There are certainly other groups of folks you could look at because full-time, first-time freshmen are not necessarily representative of what the student body looks like at every single institution. Out of those 18,500, about 58% graduated within 6 years. We saw that the degree premium or the difference between what completers and non-completers earned was a sum of about $53,000 over 5 years, or 29%, and that these folks generated 1.2 billion in gross wages over 5 years. And here I'll just show you the detail. If you look across the trend, it's a very consistent pattern. Completers earn less than non-completers. And that gap only gets wider the further we get along in time, which does make a certain degree of sense. This is another way of looking at it that sort of starkly shows the difference between the two. By 2017, completers were earning almost $12,000 more than non-completers. So that completion does actually matter in terms of foregone income and in terms of what happens to you sort of in a compounded way over time. You know, with data stuff, a lot of times a picture really is worth 1,000 words. It's easier to explain things to people and to show patterns and trends with dashboards. So I have just a couple, 3 Tableau illustrations that will show you a little bit about what we did with some of the other data that we analyzed as part of this proof of concept. So this is what's called a Sankey diagram. And what we have on the left-hand side of the screen are the degree areas in which students in the cohorts that we looked at graduated in. What we have on the right side of the screen are the industries in which those students eventually were employed. Now, there are a couple limitations to this analysis. One is that we don't have data right now for students who leave Nebraska and get a job, sort of in the same way that the statewide longitudinal data system development process is inconsistent across states and not very coordinated. We can also say the same things in terms of the primary sources of data about workforce stuff. There are a few sort of local regional collaborations, but it's very hard for me to tell right now what happens to students who leave the state. I think that will get better. Most data things are generally getting better because there's more data out there. And I'm hoping that will improve because I think it would give us more information about what happens. So basically, we can look at stuff on this chart in one of 2 ways. Where do graduates go in terms of hiring industry, or what kind of graduates were hired by a particular industry? So the size of the circles in the line indicates the number of people who went to a particular industry. In this case, we're looking at health professions, and as we might expect, a whole lot of them are employed in healthcare and social assistance, and a little bit in educational services. I'm going to guess that you guys might be more interested in something like computer and information sciences. Top areas for that are obviously information, finance and insurance, what the Department of Labor calls professional, scientific, and technical services, which are basically high skill, high demand jobs that have a very specific set of qualifications around them. Also in management of companies and enterprises. I think one thing you'll note is that computer science graduates got employed in a variety of different industries in Nebraska. We look at engineering. Also a lot in the professional, scientific, and technical services. Quite a few in manufacturing equipment, but again, a wide distribution across all of the various industries in Nebraska. Engineering technology largely goes to construction, with a little bit in the residual, a little residual in the professional, scientific, and technical services area. We can go back the other way. What I can also do when things are working correctly is I can say, you know, of the folks employed in the construction industry, what are the majors of the students who ended up getting employed there? When we originally did this proof of concept, we were looking particularly at healthcare grads. University of Nebraska has a pretty good sized nursing program and lots of affiliated programs through the medical center. So part of what we wanted to know is, where are our healthcare grads working? You'll see that there are circles in the middle of all of the counties. The circles
Kristin, your
indicate.
microphone went out because we can't hear you.
Pardon? We lose sound?
Yes, can you please repeat what you just said?
Oh, so we were interested in looking at healthcare graduates because we have quite a few of them at the University of Nebraska. Where did they go in Nebraska? What counties are they working in? You'll notice that there are circles of various sizes in each of the counties. You know, one thing that sort of dictates where healthcare grads are going is where hospitals are located. That kind of sort of makes sense, right? If I mouse over, I can see that we have 4 main hospitals in Lancaster County. You can see the list of hospitals in Douglas County. Not surprisingly, right now we're looking at nurses, BSMS, and doctorate. You can see that we have the largest number, where we have the largest number of hospitals, but there is a good distribution across Nebraska. Tendency to sort of congregate in the larger population areas, as you'd also suspect. One thing that was also interesting to look at was allied health, which is folks who, you know, if you go to the hospital, are respiratory therapists, are radiologists, not radiologists, but radiologic technicians, do cytotechnology, and various other things like that. Again, we see concentration of these folks, kind of like you'd expect, where there are more hospitals. I think this proof of concept, this has been really helpful for us internally. I think it'd be great to be able to generalize this across more institutions and for more different types of occupational areas.
Dr. Yates, can I interrupt you for 1 second? The chairman of the Nebraska Tech Collaborative, Mike Lechtenberger, would like to ask a question.
Sure.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Dr. Fritz and Dr. Yates. This is fascinating. So from one data nerd to another, this is just thrilling, actually, the capabilities here. A couple of questions that come to mind. I think I wanted a little bit more clarity on what's not in this data. And I think you referenced that this is primarily in-state data or in-state data sources that you're pulling from. So one of the use cases that we're particularly interested in is from the standpoint of the Higher Ed Committee, is how do we track or maintain connection with our graduates who have left the state so that we can find them later. And I think the answer, based on your earlier comments, were that that's not going to be in NSWERS at this point in time. I don't know if that question's come up. I'm sure it probably has. Are there alternatives that you guys have in mind how we might get some of that data? I can sure see a lot of power in that data for some of the use cases that you're mentioning, as well as some of the things we're thinking about here for higher ed.
Yeah, no, I agree that the inability to track graduates outside of the state is really a problem, because we don't know what happened to them. Right now, the workforce data that we're using is based on unemployment insurance filings, which are a very, like many things, a state-by-state sort of statutory duty. And so there's no comprehensive network. Department of Labor does have some agreements with some of the surrounding states. I don't think we're at the point where it's easy to get the data, even from surrounding states. I do think it's going to get better. I think there's a lot of potential for further, sort of consortiums or collaborations of the labor data folks around making that data more accessible. I think it's challenging sometimes because they are governed by all of their respective state statutes and what they can and can't do and what they can and can't disclose. The federal government is another potential source, probably more distantly in the future. Obviously, there are federal government agencies that hold income and employer information, but it's not generally made accessible on an individual level basis. So I don't have a really good answer for a fix right now, but I don't think I'm being naive in thinking that it's going to get better. The more people that are talking about this, the more people that are using the data, the more likely it is that we're going to be able to form these sorts of consortiums.
Mike, I think it's a great aspiration, and we certainly are all on board with that. We have had conversations with our NU Foundation about how we might be able to work with our alumni association. Well, granted, not every alum is a member of the Alumni Association. It's a place to start. We also know that many of our graduates, by virtue of the profession they intend to enter, need to have licensure, and so that's another opportunity. But it's not a single direct path to getting that information. We wish it was, but we're just not there yet.
Yeah. We have tried one other thing. We used a service called MC, which will tell us they do web scraping of like LinkedIn profiles, career link profiles. That gives us a little bit of information about maybe where folks are. It doesn't tell us much about income. We get a little information about potential, like position titles and location, but we lose that sort of income angle. Part of what we think about in Nebraska, because of the depopulation of some of the rural counties, is if students come to college, do they go back home again? And I think just from this proof of concept, it's not definitive, it's not declarative. I think the answer is yes and no. So in this particular visualization, top part, sort of the, I don't know what color you'd call this, salmon-y pink map is the counties that students were from when they enrolled with us. And then the green map down here at the bottom is where students ended up working once they graduated. So if I want to know, for instance, we had 59 students in this cohort who were from Holt County. I wonder what happened to them after they graduated. Did they go back to Holt County? Did they go someplace else? And click on that, and I can see that 11 of those 59 students did go back to Holt County. And sort of as you'd expect, you got some aggregation of graduates in Lincoln, in Omaha, and Sarpy County. This is all graduates across all disciplines. So I imagine that if you sort of parse this out by discipline, it might look somewhat different. But as an overall picture, it's kind of interesting. We can also go the other direction and say, of the 17 students that are working in Holt County, where did they come from? Sort of the same deal. A lot of them came from Holt County with a few other places. Scotts Bluff is sort of interesting. 52 graduates in Scotts Bluff. Where did they end up? Some of them ended up in Scotts Bluff. Some of them ended up in Buffalo County and Kearney, Lancaster County, Douglas County. So sort of what you would expect. One thing I think is sort of interesting is to look at this the other way, sort of from the green side of this set of maps, and think about, okay, so of all of the graduates who are employed in Douglas County, where did they originally come from? And there's a pretty good amount of them, about 3,500 students. And you can see they came from all over Nebraska. A lot from Douglas County, but a lot from many other parts of the state as well. So that's sort of a quick way to get a visual picture of, you know, that trade-off between where you're from and where you end up working.
Thank you, Dr. Yates. This is Mike Lechtenberger again.
Yeah.
I just love that. That gives you such a powerful visual of what's happening. Curious, as we've looked at some of the K through 12, I guess, students and how they move into college.
Yeah.
And obviously there's concern, I guess, or not concern, or just acknowledgement that maybe the STEM education opportunities are inconsistent across the K through 12 system. Does NSWERS now, or will it in the future, be able to help us do some maybe causal type analysis on what are some of the factors that will help increase the STEM enrollment or enrollment in technical degrees in at the university level?
I think that NSWERS eventually will be able to give you some insight into where STEM education isn't working, and sort of ways in which people might persist into those occupations at the post-secondary level. I think we'll also be able to look at things like dual credit and AP credit and see what sort of influence those have. We're really only limited by the kinds of data that we can collect. So depending on, you know, what causal factors are really salient to you, obviously we know things about geography, we know things about various school districts, we know things about ACT scores. We can know things about all of this once we get this set up.
Kristin, don't you think over time too, we'll be able to look at trends into STEM majors based on feeder schools?
Yes.
Feeder schools?
Yes, and honestly, I think we could go all the way down to course-taking patterns. I'm going to guess, and I don't know because I don't have the data for this right now, that if you didn't take 4 years of math in high school, either because you didn't take it or because your high school didn't offer it, which is also a consistent problem in Nebraska, you probably are not going to end up in a STEM profession. So that's something that we can model with the right kind of longitudinal data. And we just never have been able to do that before because we didn't have a mechanism or a structure for getting that holistic picture of a student's experience.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate the conversation here. So if there's others on the line, I'm not intending to do that. I'll shut up and mute my mic. But I think I would love to sit down, and our committee would love to sit down with you, Dr. Yates, and share with you some of our interventions that we have in mind. We're beginning to form some action around increasing some of the technology workers or graduates or qualified technical workers through the higher ed system. I guess it might be insightful just to have a conversation around what we're thinking and hear from you and or your team about some of the data that you have now or your plans for future data that may help guide us and give us some thoughts, and it may help guide you and some of your priorities around work that your team is doing as well.
Yeah, that would be absolutely awesome.
Okay, Principal Ruben Cano from Omaha South High School. Principal Cano, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Gotcha. Can you hear me now?
Yep, go right ahead, please.
Okay. I don't have a question. It's more of a comment. This is incredible. And at least at the high school level for us, this is incredible because it answers that question that kids always ask, why am I sitting here? Why am I taking this? And it allows us to answer that. So why do I need right now in the Omaha Public Schools, we only require 3 years of math, but we've been working on a constant push is that 4th year of math. Well, this gives us some statistics and some data to play with to say, here's why, what is your interest? Okay, good. Here's why that 4th year of math is important, or whatever the course content may be. So I think this is incredible. And like was already stated, I would love to learn more and even maybe be able to play around with some of this information.
Yeah, I think it would be very easy to replicate this same sort of stuff I've been showing you below on a school or a district level of the students who took 4 years of math. Where did they go to school? What did they end up majoring in? Did they graduate? What industry are they working? And are they earning a decent wage at that? I think that's an answerable question. It should be an answerable question.
That would be absolutely phenomenal. You let me know how I can get in contact with you to do that, because I truly believe that that is the next step in how we continue to build and encourage our college going culture by giving kids and parents actionable data that we've been able to collect.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
We are not there yet. We're in the early stages of sort of setting up the structure. We don't even have an executive director yet. But I don't see that as an unanswerable question.
Wonderful.
Okay, next up, I'm going to call on Matt Payne to ask his question. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hello. Hey, the raw data, is it going to be available on a public URL, or are you just going to release the Tableau analysis that you're doing?
Again, we're just in the early stages of setup, so we haven't gotten to the finer points of sort of data governance. There are restrictions on what you can release in terms of individually identifiable student level data in a public facing way. Aggregated data with some precautions is pretty easy to make public facing and downloadable so that people can use it and manipulate it. So NSWERS has a commitment to data transparency and to data usefulness. I think for a long time, even when we have collected data, we haven't used it. I personally don't see the point. Why collect it if you're not going to use it? So we want to make it as available as we can to folks within the bounds of the law. I'm also a lawyer in addition to being a data nerd. So the legal aspects of how you share data are always sort of at the front of my mind.
That's awesome. This project is very exciting. Is there an older project that has a lesser data set that's available, or similar projects in other states?
There are similar projects in other states, and they put out different levels of offerings. It's always hard to know how generalizable things are. If you find, something from Idaho, I don't know if it's generalizable to here or not. It sort of
When I poke around your website, I don't see a things kind of like us in other states section.
Yes.
I hope as you go through your governance, you decide to add that.
Yes, and that would be very easy to add. In addition to being the data nerd at the moment, I'm also the webmaster for NSWERS.org. So that kind of has come up, in the same way that we're standing the organization up. It's the website's getting developed pieces at a time, but I think that's a great suggestion.
Thank you.
We have another question from Levi Thiel from AIM. So Levi, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Great. I have a similar question about the other statewide longitudinal data systems, and this piggybacks off of a point Mike made earlier. Do we know if any other states are sharing data with each other, or is there a centralized integrated data clearinghouse where all of this data could end up? I think a lot of states would love the idea that they could track their students as they moved around the country.
Yeah. There's actually a lot of debate on that point, and there are folks who will argue very ardently for both ends of that proposition. Off and on, probably over the last, decade and a half, there have been questions about, should we have a national student level longitudinal data system? And in the way that politics works, people have gone back and forth on whether they think it's a good idea or not. And sometimes the people who thought it was a bad idea 5 years ago think it's a great idea now. But they haven't made much progress on that. I'm not going to say it could be done at the federal level. I'm not going to say it couldn't be done on a state to state level. It gets more complicated because of some of the compliance aspects with regard to student data, in terms of can you really share something that's going to be meaningful in tracking individuals from place to place, and sometimes that's sort of hard to do.
Is this something that potentially we could talk to our closest neighbors about and at least have some exploratory conversations to see if they'd be interested? Because we probably have a good idea of where our graduating high school seniors are going to college, and where, the out-migration numbers are going for graduates entering their first job outside of Nebraska.
Yeah.
And that might be a place to start.
Yeah, we can get a very coarse notion of where our graduates go in terms of where they go to college from some of the publicly available federal data. It's the workforce component that is a little stickier, because that necessarily has to sort of be transacted on a student level basis. But honestly, I don't think it would hurt to ask people in surrounding states. The worst thing they could do is say no. But then we would have asked.
I have another question from Ruben from Principal Kano. So go ahead and ask your question.
Sorry, I think I just forgot to lower my hand.
No, that's okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, I just wanted
Zoom thing.
I'm equal opportunity. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask questions. And so I want to say to people, please ask your questions, because this, again, I really think we need to get this right. And I think we all have resources and information and ideas available to pass along to these folks in order not only to help us in tech, but across the state. So, yes, so who's got another question? All right, I have Sandra Redding from Aksarben has a question.
I'm curious about any interaction the business community has had with the committee. Do you have business that's engaged in this work? And I think if there would be a lot of interest from business to engage.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you make a good point. I can tell you what's happened historically and what the intent is to happen in the future. About 4 or 5 years ago, again, in collaboration with the Department of Labor, we did a series of roundtables from folks from various sectors, from education, from nonprofits, from workforce, and sort of gathered some preliminary ideas about what was important to them and data-wise. And a lot of that has been incorporated into the initial planning for how we're standing NSWERS up. In the future, as I think Provost Fritz mentioned, there's going to be an advisory committee so that folks will always have input to the executive council in terms of what your data needs are, or what would be helpful to you, or suggestions you have, or things that are not helpful to you are also good to know. That has not gotten set up yet, because I mean, literally we are advertising for the executive director right now, but it's coming.
I think that's great. And I think what you'll find from the business community as we've socialized this with the NTC group and with the Aksarben board, that there's a lot of interest and a lot of support out there for the business, from the business community. My other question, and I guess it's maybe more of a comment, and I think about Principal Kano's comments, but I suspect that this would be an interesting topic for the superintendents meeting when they gather, I think annually in January. Just from our perspective, the more that we socialize this, the more people are interested. And I suspect that this would be really helpful for the principals or superintendents.
Sandra, I think that is a great idea. This is Susan Fritz, and I think we'd love to be able to go to that meeting in January, and actually we'll have our director firmly on the ground. One of the things that I didn't mention as I was giving the overview is part of the Business and Labor Committee's bill, I believe it was 1160, has us reporting back on December 1st of each year with our findings. And so we will have a report that is delivered December 1st that should be relevant to the superintendents. And so but we need to get some folks on the ground and get things stood up. It's going to take a good deal of curation of data before we start asking the basic questions and then move into the super interesting questions that many of us want to ask. But it starts with having the right talent in place and ready to go.
Okay, any additional questions? Dr. Fritz, Dr. Yates, do you have any last words for us? And again, this has been incredible. I love this stuff. This is amazing. I'm excited. As the NTC, we are committed to socializing and getting this information out far and wide. And we will do whatever it takes to make you all successful.
Well, Jona, we're just so thankful and grateful that you all spent the time with us today. I will tell you that we would not be where we are at today without the public-private partnerships represented here. I mentioned the foundations that have stepped up and stepped in to help us get to the point where we can represent this to our legislators, and for us to have 4 years to really stand this solidly up. It's just been fantastic. And so I want to thank them, and I want to thank all of you for your interest.
Dr.
Can I
Yates?
just,
Oh, go ahead.
well, go ahead, Dr. Yates.
Oh,
I didn't mean to talk
have-
over you there. I just want to say thank you, guys. This is very, very, very exciting. And if there's anything we can do to help advocate and help advance this effort, I think from the standpoint of the NTC, we're willing to do that. I'm not sure exactly when our next executive committee meeting is, but usually we have those. Definitely, I want to bring this back, and I'm sure Jona will as well, and just let them know what's happening here. Anything we can do to help you, let us know, because we're certainly in your corner here.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Well, again, I just want to say we are coming at the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for participating. Thank you, Dr. Yates. Thank you, Dr. Fritz. This is very exciting. I'm going to leave everybody with one big monster favor from the Nebraska Tech Collaborative. If you are on social media, if your company is on social media, please share, like, tweet, retweet. Go to our website, www.nebtechcollab.com. We post every Tuesday and Friday new content. And so again, if you're interested in writing content for us, we'd love to take it. But again, just thank you to everybody for joining us, and have a great weekend.